Hey everybody, welcome back to my coverage of the PogChamps 3 tournament. This is the championship semifinals, Rainn Wilson versus BenjyFishy, the second championship semifinals match. And Rainn is leading 1-0. Benji needs to win this game to take us to a tiebreaker, and let's just get right into the chess. Let's see if he can do it. We start off with knight to f3 from Benji and d5 from Rainn. d4 transposing into a queen's pawn game, and knight to f6. We have c4 now, and c6 transposing into a Slav defense. We have e3, the quiet variation, and bishop g4, the pin variation of the quiet variation of the Slav defense. And here, queen b3 is actually a very strong move, going after this weak b7 pawn now that this bishop is no longer defending it. I found that this has a very nice win rate as white, this queen b3 move, in this pin defense of the Slav variation. But we have h3 instead, which is also a playable move here. And here, Rainn goes ahead and takes this knight. Bishop takes f3, queen takes f3, and now we have g6 from Rainn. We have bishop e2 from Benji, continuing development, and bishop g7 from Rainn. Both players castle, and now we have knight to c3 from Benji. Both players doing a fantastic job of developing, getting castled, and controlling the center so far. So good job to them. We have e6 now from Rainn, just supporting his center, and bishop to d3 from Benji. And here I think b3 would have been more principled. You've already moved this bishop once, and you know, it's not really doing much on this diagonal that it's just looking at these pawns right here. And also, now when you move it to d3, you're giving black the opportunity to gain a tempo on your bishop whenever they please with d takes c4. So not the most accurate move. I think just playing b3 to prepare to develop this dark squared bishop would have been much better. But we have bishop d3 from Benji, which is, you know, it's not the worst move either. We have knight bd7 from Rainn, and now b3 from Benji. So now Benji plays b3, and you know, both players are still doing very well here. And here, Rainn strikes in the center with e5. We have c takes d5 from Benji, and here Rainn should simply take back this pawn with c takes d5. We could see something like knight takes d5, as it looks like white is winning a pawn here. But here, Rainn could play e takes d4, and after e takes d4, knight takes d5, queen takes d5. It looks like white is going to be up a pawn. But here, black can play the move knight c5, a discovered attack on the queen, also hitting the bishop, and this pawn is pinned to this rook right here. So you're going to lose this pawn back as white. It doesn't matter what you do. You can play bishop to c4, you can play queen takes c5, you can play queen takes d8, but whatever you do, you're going to lose this pawn eventually. Actually, sorry, I don't know why I said you could play d takes c5. You can't actually play d takes c5. Oh, I actually don't think I said you can play this move. Well, I'm clearing things up right now. You can't play d takes c5 right here because you hang your queen and also you hang your rook. But you can play queen takes c5, you can play queen takes d8, or you can play bishop c4. But it doesn't matter which one you do, you're still going to lose this pawn. So for example, queen takes d8, rook a takes d8, and now you got to save your bishop. So after like bishop c4, then you lose this pawn. Bishop takes d4, rook b1, and we have this equal endgame that we would go into. So that could have been one continuation, and really just the simplest continuation, in my opinion, that Rainn should have gone for here. But instead, I think maybe Rainn thought that he was going to be losing this pawn anyway, so he played queen to e7. And I think his idea here is he wants to play e4 and fork the bishop and the queen. But right now, you just don't have enough attackers on this square. White's got 1, 2, 3 defenders, and you've only got 1, 2 defenders. So right now, the pawn fork won't work. And this gives Benji the advantage after d takes c6, which Benji does play in the game. And now Rainn goes for e4, but this just hangs another pawn. So we have bishop takes e4. Once again, you don't have enough attackers on this e4 square as black. And so after b takes c6 and bishop takes c6, now black is just down 3 pawns. So black is just down 3 pawns for nothing here. White's up 3 pawns. This is a completely winning position for white. So let's see if Benji can convert this position now. We have rook a to c8 from Rainn and knight to e2 from Benji. We have knight b6 now, so getting this bishop unpinned from this knight with this. That was the reasoning behind knight e2, which is very good from Benji. You want to be unpinning your pieces when you can. We have knight b6 from Rainn, and now a4 from Benji. Queen to e6, forking this bishop and b pawn, so Rainn will get a pawn back. We have bishop b5, and now queen takes b3, and here there's actually a tactic here for Benji, which starts with bishop to a3, and if you try rook f to d8, as this is the only safe square for this rook, and you cannot block this bishop's attack. So if you try rook f to d8, then there is bishop to e7, and this is a fork on the knight and the rook, so black will lose at least an exchange after, for example, queen to e6, bishop takes d8, and rook takes d8. So yeah, this queen takes b3 move, trying to pick up a pawn by Rainn, didn't actually work because it falls victim to this bishop a3 tactic, but will Benji see it, is the question. No, he doesn't. He plays he plays rook to a3 instead. So Rainn got away with grabbing a pawn. He's only 2 pawns down now, but still 2 pawns. I think this position is still winning for Benji. So he hasn't thrown away his win yet. Rainn still needs to pick up some more material to get back into this. We have queen to e6 and now rook to c3. Rook c d8. Rainn does not want to go for those trades as he is down in material, and now a5 from Benji. Knight bd5 saving his knight, and bishop to c4, now pinning this knight to the queen. We have bishop c4 now pinning the knight to the queen, and queen d7. Rainn gets out of the pin. We have bishop takes d5. Now Benji okay with going for these trades as he is up in material. Knight takes d5, and now bishop to a3. But this is a huge blunder. So Benji's idea here is that he's attacking Rainn's rook, and so if you take my rook, then I'm going to take your rook, and then we can trade minor pieces if we want. But yeah, Benji here just going for these trades, but this fails tactically to knight takes c3, this knight takes c3 move, and now the idea is if bishop takes f8, now there's this, instead of recapturing this bishop immediately, there's this intermediate move, knight takes e2, which is check. So after queen takes e2 and bishop takes f8, count the pieces that were lost. White lost a rook on c3, a knight on e2, and a bishop on f8, and black only lost a knight on e2 and a bishop, or a knight on e2 and a rook on f8. So black will be up a bishop here, and black will actually be winning this position. So yeah, Rainn definitely could have gone for this. However, it's not the end of the world after bishop to a3, because after knight takes c3, you don't actually have to take this rook. You can simply immediately recapture the knight, and you only lose the exchange here. And since you're still up 2 pawns, this is still a game, and white is arguably even better here still. But yeah, we would still have a game here, and yeah, so we could have gone into that, but Rainn did not play this knight takes c3 move. He saw his rook was attacked, and he played rook f to e8 instead. And now Benji is completely winning once again. So Benji almost got into a little bit of trouble there, but he got lucky, and Rainn didn't see the tactic. We have rook to c2 now, saving his rook, and queen to a4. We have rook to c5, now counterattacking this knight here. So the idea is if you take my bishop, I'll take your knight. And we have bishop to f8. So now going for this trade, we have rook takes d5 and queen takes a3, rook takes d8, rook takes d8, and now knight to f4. And here the best move as white is rook to b1. And the idea is now if queen takes a5, now you can play rook to b7 and pressure this f7 pawn. And black doesn't really have a lot of good ways to defend it. If you play queen to d5 to try to defend it, simply you trade queens and pick up this a7 pawn, and white is going to be up 2 pawns. And if you try to defend it with queen to a2, now there's knight to c3. So now if you try to maintain the defense of the pawn with a move like queen to c4, now there's simply knight to e4. You're threatening rook takes a7. You have knight f6 ideas, knight g5 ideas, and your queen still has to stay connected to this f pawn. So overall, just a very unpleasant position to play as black, and white is going to be doing very well here. But we don't have rook b1 here. Instead, we have knight to f4 from Benji, and now this basically allows black to take this pawn with no consequences. So we have queen takes a5. Once again, Rainn is only down, or now Rainn is only down 1 pawn, and he's got this passed a pawn, so he's definitely back in this game. We have rook b1 now and a6 from Rainn. queen to e2, and once again, rook to b7 would have been a much stronger move, just activating that rook. But we have queen to e2 instead. We have queen to a4 from Rainn and queen to b2 from Benji, bishop d6 and g3 from Benji. We have g5 now attacking this knight, and this is a really weakening move because it gives up this h5 square. So now Benji can play knight to h5, and there's back rank weakness now. There's knight f6 ideas, and there's also d5 ideas, discovered threats of this on this g7 square, which might be really hard to defend. And yeah, this g5 move, just giving up this h5 square and allowing the knight to come here and control these squares along this diagonal, is just going to be very, very weakening to the black king. So Benji here could have just absolutely won pretty much immediately with this knight to h5 move. But instead, Benji plays knight to d3, which seems like the more principled move as you're keeping your knight in the center. But, I mean, knight to h5 move. This knight to h5 move was just lights out, basically. But the game continues. We have queen to d7 from Rainn and king to g2 from Benji. I don't really understand this king to g2 move. I think Benji's reasoning was he wanted to get his king off the back rank. But when you play king to g2, you now put your king on this really weak h1 to a8 diagonal. So I would argue that the back rank is less weak than this h1 to a8 diagonal. So I think g2 is even a worse square for the king than g1. Yeah, the king was just totally fine on g1. Maybe you could move it to h2, but then this f-pawn could be a target as it's no longer defended by the king. I mean, this knight and the queen are probably going to move away soon. So yeah, the king was fine on g1, I think. But we have king g2 in the game, and now rook to a8, Rainn getting his rook behind that passed a-pawn. We have queen to b7 offering a queen trade, and Rainn goes for it. Queen takes b7, rook takes b7, and we have ourselves a rook and bishop versus rook and knight endgame. We have king g7 now, Rainn getting his king into the game. However, this actually falls victim to a tactic starting with rook to d7, and the idea is you want to kick this bishop off this diagonal and then play knight e5 and pick up this f7 pawn. So for example, if black tries bishop f8 here, now there's knight to e5 and the f7 pawn will be lost. And if you try to stay on this diagonal with a move like bishop b8, now you play rook d8, pinning the rook to the bishop, so neither of these pieces can move. And if we see something like a5, black trying to promote this pawn, we could see something like knight c5, a4, and now you can't go after this bishop because your knight won't be in time to stop the pawn. So here you simply play knight takes a4, and if rook takes a4, then you take this bishop, and you're up 2 pawns once again as white, so this will be a completely winning rook endgame. So white could have gone for this rook d7 tactic here and totally won, but instead we have h4. We have h6 from Rainn now, and h takes g5. H takes g5. Rainn is totally okay with these pawn trades because the more pawns he trades, the more likely it will be for a draw. The more likely the result will be a draw for Rainn. And once again, Rainn is leading this match 1-0, so he only needs a draw to win the match. We have king to f3 from Benji, activating that king, and now a5, Rainn pushing his passed pawn. We have knight to e5, and now bishop takes e5 from Rainn, which after d takes e5, now this is actually a drawn position after a4, which Rainn plays. So now this is a drawn rook endgame. White gave up their passed pawn by allowing this trade on e5. So yeah, you want to keep your passed pawns in the endgame. Now that this pawn is no longer passed, it's going to be, well, it's not even possible for white to win anymore. Before this knight for bishop trade, white was winning, and now it's a draw. So, but you know, white is still up a pawn. Anything can happen. This is PogChamps, so maybe BenjyFishy can pull out a win from this drawn position. I think it is possible, but we'll just have to see. But we have to start. You have to start by defending this pawn from promoting. You got to get your rook in front of that pawn. So BenjyFishy realizes this and does. He plays rook to b2, and after a3, he plays rook to a2. We have king to f8 from Rainn, and here, I think the cleanest draw, the easiest draw for Rainn is rook to a4. And basically, you're cutting this king off. The only way for this king to advance, we could see something like e4. And the idea is You want to play king e3, f4, and then trade, and then play f5 and bring your king to f4. So we could see something like this, but let's just play it out. We have king g6 and now king to e3. This did not happen in the game, by the way. This is just a variation I would like to show you of how black could have very easily drawn this position. King g7 and now f4. G takes f4, g takes f4, and now the idea is f4 and king to f4 and use your king to support your pawns. But here black can just play king to f8. After f5, king e7. Or sorry, wait, f5, king e7. I don't know why I tried to move white twice in a row. King to f4. Here you can simply move your king back and forth between d7 and e7, and it's going to be a complete draw. White can do nothing. King d7, if the king comes around to g5, you don't take this e-pawn. That would be a huge blunder. If you take this pawn on e4, we could see rook takes a3, and after rook takes e5, king to f6, forking the rook and the pawn, and this would be totally winning for white. White would win this pawn, and the king would be in front of the pawn, blockading this king. We would see a Lucina position, actually, which I haven't made a video about that yet, but I am planning to in the future. So check that out on my channel if you're watching this in the future, and maybe you can find out about the Lucina position. But yeah, white could have won this if black blundered this rook takes e4, but black can still very easily draw this by simply moving their king back to e7. If f6, then simply king to e6, and nothing can be done. And also this king has to stay close to this e4 pawn because you are threatening to take this e4 pawn if the king wanders too far away. So king back to f4 and then king to d7, and this rook also cannot do anything ever because then the pawn will promote. So yeah, this would just be a draw. We would have a repetition of moves after something like this. It could look something like this, not king to g4, but king to f4. Yeah, so this would be the cleanest draw, in my opinion, after rook to a2. Simply play rook to a4 here. But we have king to f8 from Rainn, and it's still a draw, but white can fight for a win after king to g4, but that was not played in the game. We instead have king to e4. So yeah, going after this g-pawn definitely would have been better, in my opinion. We have king to e7 now and king to f5, rook to a5 now, and now the idea is if you go after the g-pawn, then I will eat one of your e-pawns. So this happens in the game after, actually this doesn't happen in the game. We have f4, g takes f4, and e takes f4. Once again, Rainn going for those pawn trades. Those will be beneficial to him. Now we have rook to a6, cutting the king off. We have g4, and now rook to a5. Black just doing a bit of waiting. King to e4 and rook to a6. King to d6, or king to d3, and king to e6. King to c3, and here as black, now the simplest draw. There's a very simple draw after rook to a4, skewering these pawns. And here there's just nothing you can do. You cannot defend with the rook because the pawn will promote. So you have to try something like king b3, and after rook takes f4, king takes a3, rook takes g4, and this pawn will be lost within the next couple moves, and it will be black fighting for the win here, but it's still a draw with perfect play. But I mean, BenjyFishy needs to win this. So Rainn could have ended the match right there with rook to a4, but instead we have king to d5. We have f5 now from BenjyFishy, and this is basically it, because now you allow king takes e5 as the e5 pawn is no longer defended, and Rainn does play this in the game. We have king to b3 going after that a pawn now, and king to f4 going after this g pawn. We have rook takes a3, but this is actually winning for black now after a couple moves ago. So yeah, you had to keep your king over here. You couldn't go over here and let black eat up all your pawns because black still has this f pawn, as we'll see. We have rook takes a3 now, and rook takes a3 is completely winning for black. In fact, it's the only winning move. King takes a3, and now black can eat up these pawns, and it will at least be a draw, but it will actually be a win with perfect play from black, so we'll see how that happens. We have king takes g4 in the game, and now f6 from Benji, king to f5, and king to b3. King takes f6 and king to c3. King to e5 now getting diagonal opposition, and king to d3. And here you got to play, or I mean, you don't have to play, but the cleanest win, in my opinion, is king to f4. And after king to e2, you play king to g3, and now you're on one of these three key squares. You can start pushing your pawn, and the pawn will promote. There's nothing white can do, absolutely nothing. But yes, you have to keep your king in front of this pawn. You cannot play the move that Rainn played, which is f5, and now this is a draw after king to e3. White has opposition. The black king can never get in front of the black pawn, so, you know, if you try king d5, then, I mean, you can play king to f4 even, and king to e6 is the only move that defends the pawn, and now the black king is behind the pawn, so this will be a draw. And yeah, if you simply push f4, which is what happened in the game, now there's king to f3, and this is the very the most common king and pawn endgame, or the most important one at least. The most important one at least, also probably the most common. But yeah, this is just a simple draw. Move straight back, grab the opposition, move in front of the pawn, and repeat until it is stalemate at the end, or black can move away from the pawn and it will be insufficient material. So we have f4 check in the game, and not king to f3, which is what I would have played, but we have king to f2, which also works. And now after king to e4, now you got to play king to e2, grabbing the opposition, and this will still be a draw. Obviously, BenjyFishy needs to win this, and that's no longer possible. He has insufficient material to win the game. But, you know, just for your information, this is how you draw this. You need to play king e2, and then we would see this technique like this, and it would be stalemate. Stalemate or insufficient material, which would be a draw. But instead of this king to e2 move, we have king g2, and now it's winning for black after king to e3. Once again, the king is now in front of the pawn and on one of these three key squares. So here Benji tried king to g1, but even if Benji played king to f1, simply king to f3, and the king's got to move to either side, whichever side the white king moves to, black goes to the other side, defends these three squares, and the pawn will promote. Nothing can stop the pawn. But BenjyFishy makes it easy for Rainn. He simply plays king g1, and now Rainn can simply play king e2, defend these three squares. Nothing can stop this pawn. So this happened in the game. Rainn played king to e2. We have king g2 now, f3 check, king g3, f2, king f4, and f1 equals queen. And now let's see Rainn do this king and queen checkmate. I'm sure he knows how to do it. Let's just see him do it. We have king to e5 and king to e3, king to d5, and queen to f4, creating that box around this king. King to e6 and king to e4, king to d7 and queen to f5 check, king to d6 and queen to e5 check, king to c5, king to d4, king d7 and king d5, king to c8 and king to d6, bringing the king in, not shrinking the box with the queen. A little weird, not the cleanest technique. Queen to e7, just cutting the king off. And then you have this in here. This would have been the cleanest win. But we have king to d6 instead. King to b7, queen to c5, king to a6. Once again, you have another chance to cut the king off on this first rank. You know, king to a7, king to c7, and doesn't matter where the king goes. It will be checkmate next. But we have queen to c6 check instead. So maybe Rainn doesn't actually know the technique. This technique has been kind of weird. We have king to a5 now, and don't play king c5 because that would be stalemate. Once again, you got to play queen b7. That's what I would play at least. Here you can come queen b2, or you could just do it like this, and then bring the king in over here. Bing, bang, boom, and this is going to be checkmate. So you could do it like this. But instead of queen b7 here, Rainn plays king to c5, and it's stalemate. Rainn Wilson stalemates BenjyFishy, and it's a draw. He still wins the match, but come on, Rainn, you know. You made it to the championship semifinals. This is no longer stalemate territory. Like, come on, dude. But you know, he still wins the match. BenjyFishy is eliminated. Rainn Wilson moves on to the PogChamps 3 finals. Here are those standings for you. Rainn Wilson will play Sardosh in the finals tomorrow, February 28th, 2021. And yeah, what are my thoughts about this match? BenjyFishy, he played well. He had a few unfortunate blunders. He was the favorite to win this match, so congrats to Rainn on the upset. And yeah, I guess we'll just see how Rainn plays. We will not get to see a BenjyFishy versus Sardosh rematch, unfortunately, for those of you who were looking forward to that rematch. But yeah, both players played really well this match. And I hope BenjyFishy continues playing chess. I know he played a ton of chess. He studied a ton for this tournament, so I hope he continues playing chess. And we'll just have to see who wins that Rainn Wilson versus Sardosh match tomorrow. So I don't think I have anything else to say about this game or this match. Thank you for watching. Stay awesome. Stay subscribed. Check out my PogChamps 3 playlist up there, and check out another chess video over there. I'll see you next time.